Final Exam Study Tool, created by Zaria Unkinson, Argay Ashkri, Amira Burks, Michaela Church, Dominique Coney, and Kasai DeBeese. Literary eras 1865 to present. During the years of 1865 to 1914, the periods that occurred were realism, realistic period, naturalism, naturalistic period, regionalism, local color, and Gothic. Between the years of 1914 through 1939, the periods that occurred were the modern period, imagism, jazz age, the roaring 20s, Harlem Renaissance, and many more. Between the years of 1939 to current 2019, the contemporary period occurred, postmodernism, the Beat Generation, metafiction, and magic realism.
From 1865 to 1914 was known as the realistic period. Between 1865 and 1914, there were two major literary movements that took place in America, realism and naturalism. Realism was a literary movement that focused mainly on ordinary characters in everyday life. Naturalism was a branch of realism. Like realism, it focused on people in regular situations, but naturalists also believed that there were forces that were bigger than humans, such as nature or fate. From 1914 to 1939, this is known as the modern period. In American literature, the modern era was most known for its very different style of poetry and writing. The Imagist movement was a major part of this. This style strayed away from traditional styles and attempted to portray a single image at a time. During this time, authors began to experiment with their writing and began to earn international acclaim. Although the authors had very different styles and themes, overall, their purpose remained the same. During this period, a lot of literature was very pessimistic, and a common theme was the American life during the Great Depression and both world wars. From 1939 to the present is known as the contemporary or postmodernism period. During this period, authors had a much more positive outlook on life than in the previous era. Common themes were identity, racism, and a search for goodness and humanity. Race and identity were themes that African Americans used in order to help write about their experiences and their culture. Many women during this time also used the theme of identity during the women's civil rights movement.
I know sometimes writing an essay can become stressful. You might forget the basics. Here I have some tips and tricks to ensure that you are writing your essay correctly in MLA format. The first one is to always remember using 12 point and Times New Roman font and double space throughout your essay. Indent at the beginning of each paragraph using the tab key and not the space bar. It heeds you to number your pages in the upper right hand corner with your last name and page number. For example, my last name is Akinsawan, and if it was on the first page, I will put 1. So it will be Akinsawan 1 in the upper right hand corner. It is imperative that you cite all your sources that you have in your essay to avoid plagiarism claims. When you cite your sources, it shows that you've done proper research in listing all your sources and all the information that you received, and to give credit to those researchers and acknowledge your ideas. You can also create an outline to stay on track. When you create an outline, it gives you a body of what you should be talking about in your essay so you won't be so lost. You should write down and follow your thesis statement. When you write your thesis statement and you follow it to the T, you won't ramble on about different subjects and you can stay on task in your essay. You should add your personal touch to ensure that you show your personality in your writing, and it is imperative to edit and proofread your work to ensure that you're producing your best essay. Throughout this American literature course, we have been introduced to different terms that relate to these specific time eras. In 1865 to 1914, realism, naturalism, and regionalism were some specific movements in the late 19th century. Some authors who portrayed these terms in their writings were Kate Chopin, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Mark Twain. In 1914 to 1939, modernism, imagism, and experimentation were some literary movements that influenced American writers such as Robert Frost, Langston Hughes, and E. E. Cummings. In 1939 to present, postmodernism, existentialism, and magic realism are some of the terms that were used in their writings. Writers such as Anne Sexton, Billy Collins, and Audre Lorde portray these terms in their writings. For this final, you should know all these terms so you can be familiar with the movements and the concepts of the corresponding eras.
For this course, we received reading lists in each module. The modules are all about specific American literary eras. The names given in the reading list are authors who are relevant during the corresponding era. In the era of 1865 through 1914, writers such as Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Kate Chopin produced prose pieces relating to the genre of realism. This is where nonfiction and autobiographies came into play. Era 1914 through 1945 introduced modernism with mentionable authors such as Robert Frost, Zora Neale Hurston, and Edna St. Vincent Millay. They all produced poetry that went against tradition. Era 1945 to present day has authors who wrote using postmodernism such as Gwendolyn Brooks, Leon Lee, and Sherman Alexie. For the final, we need to make sure that you know at least one of the works by each of the authors on the list to make sure that you're familiar with their writing styles.
The 5 main literature genres that students should focus on: poetry, drama, prose, nonfiction, and media. Number 1. Poetry. This is often considered the oldest form of literature. Before writing was invented, oral stories were commonly called poetry. Number 2. Prose. Prose can be defined as any kind of written text that's not poetry. It's written in sentences and organized paragraphs. It tends to focus on plots and characters. Number 3. Dramas are usually called plays. Number 4. Nonfiction can be creative, such as personal essay and scientific papers. Sometimes the purpose of nonfiction is to tell a story, to pass on information and educate the readers about certain facts, ideas, and issues. Number 5. Media, such as movies, films, websites, commercials, billboards, and radio programs. Any work that does not exist primarily as a written text can probably be considered media.